Last night I spoke to my friend Mary, and I told her, you know what, after today, most of my points have been covered. I can tell after these speakers, all my points have been covered. So I'm afraid it's going to be repetition for emphasis. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the opportunity also to share my insights that I've gleaned not only from my own practice, but also from my understanding of the psychological theories, as well as from the recent research, especially the CAS review. So let's get this right. So I'll be discussing my understanding of the psychological drive to transition. I don't have the full picture, but I hope I can add a piece to the puzzle. And for our discussion, I will give a very concise summary of psychological development, the trajectory of psychological development according to Freud, but also ideas from Melanie Klein and Wilfred Bion. I will speak a bit on the conflicts between what Freud writes as the conflict between the pleasure principle and the reality principle. I will go into what it means to symbolize according to Melanie Klein, and also then Bion's understanding of how experience is transformed from, and a new word, from inchoate or body-bound to more sophisticated concepts. We will go over to the environment's role in facilitating psychological development, and I will bring these two together in discussing adolescent psychology and its challenges. And then we will conclude with the punchline, the drive to transition as maladaptive coping mechanism. So my focus group here is young people who suffer with rapid onset gender dysphoria. We can discuss small children, we can discuss adults, autogynephilia, and there are similarities among these groups. But for my time and for what we have to discuss, we will only focus on rapid onset gender dysphoria. So, like I said, Freud said that our psychological world is essentially conflict between the pleasure principle and the reality principle. And when he spoke about pleasure principle, he was referring to the instincts, the innate instincts we were all born with. Some of these instincts are sexual and creative, and others are aggressive and destructive. And these are drives that want expression and satisfaction. And with these drives, we go into the world and we meet reality. And reality says, most of the time, no. And when we run into reality and our drives don't get expressed, what we experience is frustration. But frustration is the key to thinking. You know the expression that says, necessity is the mother to all invention? Well, frustration is the experience of necessity. And thanks to frustration, we start thinking about what our limitations are. So we start modifying some of our environment. But if we cannot modify our environment, we need to modify our experience of that frustration. So we know that frustration doesn't necessarily directly link to thinking, because we oftentimes respond defensively. We might imagine the frustration away, we might resort to fantasizing or to hallucinating. At other times, we cannot do that, and the frustration persists, and they would like to get rid of this uncomfortable experience and enact that frustration aggressively onto our environment. And sometimes we see it with infants. I think many of us have seen when an infant is unhappy and tired and hungry, and mom doesn't quite attune to the infant. They kick and scream. They really want to get rid of this embodied anguish. But fortunately, in many cases, we have a good enough mother, as Winnicott calls her, or beyond the containing mother. And she attunes, and she listens to the child, and she takes what the child gives her, and she does the modification. She uses reality. She uses reality as the criterion, and she gives it back in digested form, and gradually the infant starts integrating and starts calming down. And what it does is it creates the rudiments of symbolization. Symbolization means the ability to make sense of our experience. And what the infant learns from those early interactions is that frustration is survivable. And so that infant grows up and becomes a toddler. And the toddler is also energetic with their instincts, again, creative instincts and aggressive instincts. And they experience the world as their oyster. And again, the world many times says no. That toddler encounters the no's of hard surfaces, of gravity, of darkness, of sounds, like physical reality that says no. But that toddler also learns about biological no's. The no's of difference. Difference in species. There are humans and there are doggies and kitties, and when you're from South Africa, there are meerkats and hoenders and chickens and everything else. So there are differences in species, and then there are differences of generations. There are adults and there are children. And these different people have different abilities and privileges. And also, crucially to our discussion, difference in sex. There are boys and girls. There's man and woman. And many times these youngsters experience the negation of reality as frustrating. But this they need to integrate. So what do? They start imagining being someone of the other generation, of being someone of the other sex, of a different species. And in imaginative play and in imitation and identification, they manage to integrate what they otherwise would not have been able to do. But fortunately, again, there's the containing good enough parents. They know this is imagination. They're containing. In other words, they don't violate the law. And the law says no. The biological laws of difference. And they manage to integrate it through play, like I said, but also through language. So let's just, for this part, summarize it. So the trajectory of psychological development, according to these three thinkers, is that reality is tragic. Okay, there's a conflict between the reality principle and pleasure principles. Symbolization enables us to make sense of our experiences, and that enables us also to transform body-bound anguish to more sophisticated mental concepts. And then ultimately, what we need is a containing environment essential to integrate reality, an environment that doesn't collapse the no. So let's think about this environment. When we think of good enough environments, I just explained good enough environments, at times these environments are not adequately aligned to the needs of the child. When we think about misaligned environments, we usually think of very harsh or traumatizing environments, where the child feels that reality is too difficult, it's too dangerous, frustration feels like non-survival, and they'd much rather withdraw as opposed to engage with reality, because reality is traumatizing. Or they experience it as so dangerous that they'd much rather fend off reality. So many of these children are emotionally dysregulated and aggressive, not very flexible in their thinking, not very creative. They just want to self-protect. That's an overly harsh environment, misaligned to the child's needs. But then there's a different kind of environment that we don't always think about, and that is the over-coddling environment. And in 1996, there was a paper that appeared by Juliet Hopkins, and the paper's title was "The Dangers and Deprivations of Too Good Mothering." And she describes how over-mothering deprives the child of the opportunity to experience frustration. They tend to be over-involved. They have a desire to shield the child from all frustration. And gratification becomes the mode of emotional regulation. Gratification. Not structure, not the no, not boundaries, but to gratify and to do so quickly. And to these children, frustration remains unbearably dangerous. Frustration remains unsymbolized. Many of these children grow up psychologically immature, very susceptible and vulnerable to external harmful influences. And they don't develop the necessary resilience and ego strength to resume their development of the next phases. And that next phase is adolescence. So we have the first critical phase, that's the first 6 years of a child's development. And then there's latency, according to us, psychoanalytically trained psychologists. But then adolescence comes. And adolescence is a critical period because there's a lot of physiological and social changes that take place in a child's world. Just think for yourself. So the instincts are switched on again, and that is why the sexual and the aggressive loom large in the lives of an adolescent. So changes is difficult because they need to adjust their understanding of these changes all the time. And the crucial question they need to answer is, who am I? And that changes all the time. So, again, embodied, they engage with the world. It's the greatest leap of individuation that they take. They widen their sphere of engagement. They're obsessed with peers, same-sex and opposite-sex peers. And that is their realm of engagement. It's a super difficult time because they need to learn about their own limitations and abilities. And they might suck at something at age 14, only to discover that at age 16 or at age 18, they're actually pretty good. But this identity formation and consolidation has to have a reality aspect. Because what is identity? It's my perception of myself, of who I am. It's a self-concept. It's understanding what is me and what is not me. There's got to be a reality aspect to it. It is true about our abilities, whether I'm athletic or not. It's part of my identity. It's true about my aptitudes, where I'm good at math or not. That's part of my identity. It's also true about my sex, whether I'm a boy or a girl, male or female. But as with childhood, where am I? Yes, good. So as with childhood, impaired symbolization and misaligned environments can lead the young person to resort to maladaptive coping styles. And in many severe cases, they resort to types of coping that would exhibit itself or show itself up as psychiatric disorders. In the last 10 to 15 years, we've seen a steep increase in certain psychiatric disorders, specifically the mood and anxiety disorders. Mood disorders, depression-related, bipolar-related, lack of disruptive disorders, lack of ability to adequately self-soothe, contain, self-regulate those emotions. Those primary diagnoses have very much shot up. Also, in correlation with excessive and extensive smartphone use. But along with these, we've also seen a group of certain disorders that are contagion-prone. And these are disorders involving the body, where we see that the anguish, unprocessed, unsymbolized, remains body-bound. And there is this enaction of frustration onto the body, not only as the cause of the anguish, but as the target of that aggression. And these disorders are usually eating disorders. We know eating disorders has this dynamic because they restrict, they withhold food, they feel this anguish and they want to starve this anguish, or they purge. Remember yesterday we spoke about exorcism? Similar expression. They want to get rid of this experience of this unwanted thing they have in their bodies. Body dysmorphic disorder. We see many of these kids self-mutilate. And then the big clanger, gender dysphoria. I've come to understand that gender dysphoria and the psychological drive to transition is a maladaptive coping mechanism using the sexed body as a decoy for opting out of adolescent development. Many of these kids come from extreme environments, either very traumatic, where they don't have the internal stamina to continue with the necessary developmental goals of adolescence, or they grow up in Disneyfied childhoods, helicopter parenting, snowplow parenting. That's a nice expression. Removing all the obstacles ahead of them so that they can have as smooth a ride as possible. But I've also come to learn that many of these kids fall victim to the seductions of the wider world, where they may have grown up in a very healthy, normal, straightforward background. But as soon as they start expanding their social world, they run into influences that seduce them into this gender ideology. They learn that adolescence is actually something that's supposed to be easy and fun. And if they feel anguish, there's something wrong. Not with them, but with the world. And if the world gives them structure, it's malicious, it's gratification withholding, and it should therefore be subverted and destroyed. And that is what we call queer ideology. Sadly, we see that with many of these young people, they enact the primitive defenses I mentioned earlier. Many of them resort to denial defenses, withdrawing from the necessary goals they need to reach, opting or seeking out environments that would only affirm what they want to believe, avoiding names, pronouns, images of themselves in mirrors that would remind them of their sexed bodies. Those are denial defenses. Also projective defenses. They're in distress. Their distress is unmetabolized, undigested. So even after transitioning, it's only a matter of time until that distress comes back. Still undefined, still undigested. We've seen some of those pictures of children coming out of, or young people coming out of surgeries, and then they put their bodies on display. In addition to those scars, which other scars do we see? Self-mutilation scars. Only a matter of time. That is why you won't ever hear me say gender affirmative therapy or treatment, because gender affirmation is not therapeutic. It's anti-therapeutic because it colludes with the primitive defenses of a child in attack and subversion of necessary structure. So the drive to transition, in conclusion, like I said, is a regressive defense against confronting the demands of adolescent development. Yes, it has something to do not only with the psychology, but also with misaligned environment. But there is hope. Any arrested psychological condition can also be, unarrested, unfrozen. And with the right interventions, psychosocial interventions according to the CAS review, social interventions family-wide, school-wide, smartphone use, peers, etc., as well as exploratory psychotherapy, the environment can be created where these young people can grow up however they're going to present and live meaningful and fulfilling lives. Thank you.